Assalamu alaikum. I hope you guys are all well, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan for joining, and it's always a pleasure to see you all, inshallah. I've already got some comments. May Allah reward you for tuning, to all those who've tuned in. Subhanallah. So today's topic actually came about from a video that I watched, and I think it's really important for us to be able to address some things where, like, for example, we know that in the Quran, we're told do not come close to Zina. Right? Don't even take the steps towards it, or that could lead to this, very punishable and also very destructive thing that we're warned about or warned against. So the reason why I think I wanted to do this topic today, more so than anything really, is because I know how, as living in a society where everyone is very, very much aware of the sexualization and also the objectification of women and also men now, unfortunately, and how these play out in our society. And in regards to that, I feel like there's so much that we're not being accountable for, and we're not being responsible for, because we know we have responsibilities. Therefore, with responsibilities, there is gonna no doubtably be accountability for it. And I know that sometimes we could look at the outside, and a young person, especially in this day and age, could feel like, well, you know what, I'm wearing the hijab, I'm not really mixing with anyone, and I'm not, I'm following the guidelines of Islam. But we, subhanAllah, it's sad to say, but we see a lot of our youngsters falling into, our young people are falling into a lot of things that result into, long, sort of these long effects of the consequences that they make at a moment of weakness. So this video that I found, it came up really on my feed, and I thought, oh, what a very interesting video it is. So I just clicked on it, and then it made me think. So this is coming from a particular gentleman who, I think he's in the community where it teaches men how to, captivate young women with their words, and also sort of ultimately to deflower them, to, put them in a compromising position. And I think as young women, when, certain needs are not met for you in the household that you've come from, and also, the people that are meant to protect you, it's easy to fall for the praise, the praises, and also, excuse me, the praises, and also how people can, sometimes play with your mind. And because we know that, a young woman, she wants to feel seen, she wants to feel, appreciated and also admired into some respect. And when we think of that, those, no matter like what, no matter how much we instill in our children, the authentic teachings, the Hadiths, the Quran. Wa alaikum assalam, jazakallah khairan all for joining. May Allah reward you. So when we think of the things that we instill in them, yes, it's good to know and it's good to understand. But when you look at the outside world, and there's this sense of false freedom that is shown to you, and you see people laughing and people enjoying and doing things that to a believer might seem like they're liberated, it could cause a sense of cognitive dissonance. It could really cause this to sort of like, maybe you could even put it down to having these identity crises, where in the home you present yourself one way, but then when you're faced with peer pressure, and or you're faced with a very strong sort of lustful attraction to someone of the opposite gender. You can't control those feelings because they're very overpowering at some time, at some points. And no matter how much hadith, no matter how much Islamic teachings and principles that you've got, if you weren't taught Islam, I guess, in the right way, or if there was something lacking or deficient within sort of maybe your structure, it could cause some serious problems, because then what you're left with is you can't quite reconcile the two. So in your mind, you're thinking this one way, you're working for the hereafter, the life to come. But then in this other, side of you, you're thinking, well, I want to experience, these forms of freedoms where I'm allowed to do what I want to do. And it's quite sad if we really think about it, because then, now it's like, sometimes I feel like, well, for people that live in the West, you're not living back home, right? You don't have people that look like you don't have people that practice your faith, you don't have, where with, I guess, having a society that, Islam is easy to practice in. And I know there's obviously issues as well within, various parts of the world that we all come from when it comes to being born Muslims. But in saying that, I feel like there is also this aspect of, having that ease within the deen. So like, even if your friends are doing things, or even if things are being done, it's done behind closed doors. It's not something that's out widely, for people to view and for people to, to get affected by. So just going back to some of the things that I wanted to share with us, I'm going to put on the video, by the way, the title is true. There is a reaction video that I've got, but I just wanted to set some kind of, groundworks before I bring the video up, inshallah. So there's a form of like the feelings, or I guess the unmet needs and desires or expectations that one could have when they're younger, or the wanting is, attention. It's about acceptance. It's about appreciation. It's about affection and allowance, right? So these these 5 things that I've just sort of addressed here, these are the things that really hold, this sort of anchoring emotional, I guess you could say, chains on us as human beings. Because when we want attention, it's attention to be seen, and these are the things that when we didn't get as a child, when we grow up as adults now, and we actually meet partners, inshallah, that are, whether they're righteous or not, but either way, we meet, someone of the opposite gender, we end up playing these roles and these scripts out through them or with them. Because then, when we think of what attracts people together, of course, it's the initial attraction. There's something that you like, whether it's physically or a trait or a character. There's something about this person that you like. And then when we think of acceptance, it's accepting who you are, and allowing you to be your authentic self, accepting your flaws, the deficiencies that you might have in your character. Then there's the appreciation of who you are, your uniqueness, the appreciation of the gifts that you hold within you, the appreciation for your kindness, your generosity, things that will make people, sort of more yielding in terms of towards you. And then affection is something that definitely gets played out in the relationship dynamic, because it's a way of nurturing. We know physical touch and closeness, it releases, oxytocin and certain hormones into one's sort of from their brain, and it gets excreted into their body. then we have allowance, allowance for making mistakes, allowing you to not have it all figured out, allowing you to grow and to evolve into who you're eventually going to be, inshallah. So when we I guess when people have different agendas, and unfortunately we live in a society where it's been told to us, how to get some of these needs met is through and again, it's not, I guess society has some form to play in this part, but it's more so also evolutionary. It's more about biology. We need to allow people to, inshallah, not allow, I mean, like, allow, we need to be able to procreate, right? So this is a genetic thing that's built within us to meet people of the opposite gender, where we could eventually, inshallah, procreate and bring more life into the world, and keep the human race sort of going and evolving, subhanallah. So again, like, I'm touching on all these little different nuances on this topic, only for the purpose that when we're taking there's so many underlying issues, right? So when we're told, don't even come close to zina, so we know that zina, at the end of the day, it's, yes, it's the actual act, but before the actual act, it's the reason why we're told to lower your gaze, because lowering your gaze at the end of the day protects you from taking those small steps towards that. And then it's also the tongue, what we utter, what we hear. There's a hadith that I want to share with us of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and it was narrated by Abu Huraira, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's narrated by Abu Huraira, and he says, radallahu an, and he says that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, and I quote, Allah has decreed for every son of Adam his share of zina, which he will inevitably commit. The zina of the eyes is looking, the zina of the tongue is speaking. One may wish and desire, and the private parts confirm or deny it. End of quote. And this is referenced in Al-Bukhari 5889 and Muslim 2657. So when we think of this, like, some people might think, well, do you know what? I'm not kissing, someone. I'm not touching them. And these are the greater signs. But there's also the conversations that we have, which is what's going to lead to the video now, which lead also up to all these major steps that could be, in front of us, that we might fall into. So when we think of, okay, like, you're talking to someone, it's a very innocent conversation, you're thinking nothing of it, but there's actually more. Like, even just watching this video, I myself today actually learned a lot about, just general conversations of, how people could evoke certain emotions within you. And as I mentioned beforehand, is that for women, there is this sense of, wanting to be appreciated, wanting to have affection, acceptance, and allowance. And for a young woman, that could, I guess, the way it could show up or manifest for her is through the eyes of, being with someone else. But if society, unfortunately, is teaching a lot of us nothing about accountability and nothing about personal responsibility, then you might fall prey to, someone who is ultimately very selfish and who just wants what he wants, and he just wants to get what he wants to get. So inshallah, I'm gonna go into the video. Salam, take a look. When my friend temporarily moved in, I never thought I'd fall for her. I was wrong. Oh, subhanallah. Thank you for sharing that, Joe. It's quite a insight. Thank you. So I'm gonna put myself on mute, and then come back, inshallah, and play the video.
Today I want to talk to you about the conversational topics you can use that lead to sex. One of the biggest problems that guys have in game is the inability to take a platonic conversation and make it man to woman. And a big reason for this, I think, is that they're scared. The big reason that they're scared is that they think they have to make some big, bold, scary, risky move. And that's not the case at all. One of the best ways to escalate a conversation involves very little risk, and that's actually just escalating the topic of the conversation towards a more sexual one. You see, there are 4 different ways you can escalate. One is by getting physical. One is by changing the venue of the conversation, moving it to a more intimate location. The third is by changing the way you address the relationship between you and the girl, i.e. using the word we instead of you and I, or saying, you're going to be my girlfriend for the next 5 minutes, things like that. Or finally, you have escalating the topic of conversation, making that more intimate and more sexual. And that's great because it is so subtle, and because you don't have to actually talk about sex directly in order to sexualize a conversation. See, as human beings, we think in associations, right? We associate things together. There's an old phrase from the 80s, I think it's the 80s, I don't know, a long time ago, that goes sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And that phrase, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, is really like a great idea and a great phrase, because the idea is there's these 3 things that are completely unrelated. Sex is not related to drugs, it's not related to rock and roll, at least not directly. However, they're all kind of subsets of the same cultural kind of initiative, right? They're all kind of outside of the proper, they're outside of the respectable and looked up upon. And so there's this culture that people that have sex, there's a greater tendency to do drugs and have sex. There's a greater tendency for the people that were listening to rock music back when rock and roll was like the edgy, kind of frowned upon thing, to have sex, right? So the people doing one thing were more likely to do the other. There was this association. To kind of make the topic more concrete for you, on OkCupid, they have a bunch of survey questions on their dating site, and they did a correlation study. What question was most correlated, most related to the question, would you be willing to have a one-night stand? That's not a sexual question. And the answer to that question was, do you enjoy the taste of beer? Idea being, people who enjoy the taste of beer, not only drink beer, but also like it, drink it often, maybe have drunk beer from a young age, are the type of people that are more sexually open, more willing to have a one-night stand. So if you get started talking about beer, drinking, partying, you're starting to move in the direction of that sort of one-night stand, or you're starting to move in the direction of sex. And there are a lot of topics like this. For example, tattoos and piercings. Pretty common nowadays, but they're still just a little bit edgy. And that edginess is, it's about the body, and it's about being edgy, so it leads you down that sexual direction. I already mentioned drugs, alcohol, those kind of things, those topics. Partying, staying out late. Traveling is a big one. Traveling is huge, because traveling is something that's considered adventurous. It's something that you're getting away from your social circle. So people that have traveled usually have adventures when they're traveling. Maybe they do things out of character when they're traveling. So that mindset of traveling puts you into a more sexual, more free, more liberated mode, right? In particular, girls, if they've ever traveled alone, tend to do a lot of things when they're traveling alone, and they don't have their friends to be judging of them that they wouldn't do in other contexts. So finding out if girls travel, talking about travel and spontaneous adventures, those kind of things also will lead to sex. And then obviously anything along the lines of sex itself, but lighter. Talking about kissing leads to sex. Talking about skinny dipping leads to sex. Those types of ideas, right? And actually, to be fair, and this is a big one for a lot of guys, even just the very words you use are going to indicate whether you're a sexual person or not a sexual person. For example, if
So I'm back. I think hopefully you guys could hear me. So when we think of, is it a speaker on? Yeah, it is. So the reason why I put up this video, by the way, he swears a little bit, so inshallah I'm going to try and skip that. But he spoke about quite a few things where, especially now, we see a lot of people indulging in, Muslims and non-Muslims. Like you spoke about body piercings, not piercings, body tattooing. And we know that, you know, this is again a very edgy, like I think even now, like if you go to, you know, if you're trying to become a police officer, or if you're going to work in places where it's, you know, very professional, kind of in a professional setting, you know, there is an element where you have to cover up your tattoos. You know, it's not something that you could, it's not something that you'd be able to show. And, you know, now we see a lot of people getting tattooing, unfortunately, you know, various different tattoos and different things. And again, the people that I remember, like when I was younger growing up, people that would have tattoos and these kind of piercings or whatever, you know, you would always see them as people that were very adventurous and, you know, not adventurous, more so edgy. You know, it was kind of like they were hard. They were seen like as the cool sort of people that who would do something like that, because it's painful. You know, it's something you're actually graffitiing your body. You know, you're doing harm to your body. But again, like you said, it's not so much about the act; it's the representation of things. So when, you know, maybe a brother might ask you about, you know, your struggles with a hijab or whatever it is, and again, like I'm referring this to sort of from an Islamic sense, but even just in general, like the conversations that if you're trying to get to know someone for marriage, we know that, you know, people go on various different apps to look for, you know, potential suitable spouses for both men and young women. Again, the conversations that get started up. You know, if someone asks you about traveling, like when he said about traveling, like I know, you know, I've heard of countless of stories, and I personally know, you know, young girls now, it's, you know, it's the it thing to do. If we see on social media, we see so many young Muslim sisters that are traveling alone. You know, they're going to a lot of these very beautiful, beautiful countries, sort of holiday destinations. But at the same time, there is that sense of, okay, well, you know, there is that sense of, you know, wanting to be adventurous. And again, he said, you know, a lot of these things, you know, they don't really have direct, in, you know, things that interlink them. But there is that element of, okay, so, you know what, you drink beer, like he said, you know, may Allah, you know, protect us, and inshallah, may Allah, you know, keep us protected from these fitnas. But he said, you know, you wouldn't, in Cupid, you wouldn't directly ask a woman if she wanted to have a one night stand, but to sexualize the conversation, you will sort of head towards, oh, do you like drinking beer? And again, these are the deadly things that are really, you know, damaging for us as human beings, where we're told to stay away from it. Because, you know, this is not a Muslim guy. May Allah guide him and, you know, guide us all. Ameen. But just from the little that he shared, subhanallah, like the psyche of the mind is that if a young person or someone started drinking from a very, very young age, you know, there is this association with them where they will be a lot more open, and a lot more, I guess, maybe would have experimented within sort of sex or sexuality, with that. So, subhanallah, I thought this conversation was something that's really interesting. So I'll keep going anyways and playing. Wa alaikum assalam, thank you for joining. So I'm going to start the video and then but I'll forward it. I think he does swear at one point.
You, for example, say you talked about like getting naked or like being like taking your clothes off, and you like lowered your voice, like we took our clothes off. That's showing you're uncomfortable with the idea. That's showing you're uncomfortable with your own body, with nudity. Girl doesn't want to have sex with a guy who's uncomfortable with his body and uncomfortable with nudity, because she's probably going to make her uncomfortable as that time comes about, right? Or another one is guys that are.
So again, like he said, you know, when it comes to a woman and, you know, sort of not speaking in, I guess, the way he said in a lower voice, where, you know, it shows that maybe he's a bit uncomfortable about speaking about nudity or whatever else. He said, you know, for a guy not to be uncomfortable, because what then that leads to is the woman feeling uncomfortable. So again, is that sense of, you know, there is no accountability to any of this. It's just, you know, you have a desire, and in order for you to get what you want, you have to portray this facade to a young woman, so you could do what exactly, right, to deflower her. So I'll continue.
A little bit too polite. They're not willing to swear. If you're unwilling to say the word fuck, you're probably not going to be.
So I just paused because he did actually swear, and I was trying to avoid that. But basically, he was speaking about saying the F word, and he said, you know, if you don't say the F word, then likely is that you're not going to obviously, you know, do the deed. So again, like if you look at society now, literally everybody swears like they're pretty much a sailor. You know, there's that saying where, you know, when you're swearing, and the words, again, is a form of zina, right? Because you're not only planting these kind of seeds, and I know like music videos, for example, a lot of the words they use are very derogative. They're very dehumanizing to a woman, and very just really unpleasant to hear, right? But again, we've come to a point where we're so desensitized from hearing these words that it's actually become normal. So you'll see like young girls, you know, Muslims and non-Muslims, young boys, Muslims and non-Muslims, and literally every other word that comes out of their mouth is, you know, it's a very rude word. It's cursing, it's swearing. But then again, like, you know, what is that plant? What's that seed that's been planted? Because like he said, if you're not swearing and you're not, you know, you're not, I guess, being suggestive, that means you're not going to be able to get laid, which is basically what this guy is teaching.
Swear up a storm. I'm not saying you should, like, you know, use that as a replacement for good conversation, but if there is a moment when around your friends or around you're comfortable with, you would go ahead and use an expletive, you should go ahead and do that in the context around a girl. It shows that you're not uptight. It shows that you're okay with things. And it shows that, quite frankly, those topics are fine, comfortable, and natural to you. The more you can show those kind of things, the better off you're going to be. So let me give you kind of an example, kind of a template for how this could be used. And this is an old school kind of game routine. And if you want to actually use this game routine, it still works to this day. It's still a pretty good routine. But more than the routine itself, I want you to learn the concept behind it. And the routine is called the question game. The way it works, very simply, if I were playing the question game with you, the way it goes, I ask you a question, you have to answer honestly, then we switch. You ask me a question, I have to answer honestly. That's it. Very simple game. Not all that brilliant. The brilliant part is this. When you play the question game with a girl, you're going to select a topic that is one of these non-sexual sexual topics. For example, do you have any tattoos or piercings? Or how old were you when you had your first drink? Things like that that are just like bordering on something a little bit naughty. Or what is the most trouble you got into in high school? Something that's a little bit naughty but not sexually explicit, or at least you don't know necessarily that it's sexually explicit. And the thing that's going to happen is this. You're going to get her talking about those things that are just a little bit naughty, and then she's going to ask you questions. And because she's going to be responding to the tone of conversation, and because, to be honest, if she's sitting there talking to you, she's probably enjoying you, and wants the conversation to go in a sexual direction herself anyway, she very likely will follow suit and ask a question that's equally as risque or equally as intimate to the one you just asked, if not more so. And then once that occurs, you can go one step further and one step further and one step further. And so pretty soon you're talking about sex, and it's not a far cry from...
So like, again, he just said, you know, it's the tonality and where you lead the conversation. So again, it's for us as women to be mindful of, you know, the kind of image of the man that, or the image that we have of the man that inshallah potentially we want to get involved with. Because if a man is playing with words, and he's using them to really manipulate you, because he knows that, you know, you enjoy his company, like he said, or you want to be liked by him, then it's understanding that, are you being manipulated? You know, are those conversations? And again, like, even if we think about it, you know, as a young woman, if you haven't been exposed to any of these things, and you know, you're only coming from a Muslim home where, when you look to the outside world, you're seeing this, you know, liberation and freedom and all these banners that they seem to be upholding, and under false pretense, telling us that this is success when it comes to this world. You're very impressionable, you're very naive, and you're very receptible to the things that you're hearing, especially when it comes to a man who, for him, he's obviously, inshallah, to be honest, like, inshallah, a true person, a brother of faith, wouldn't even be entertaining in any of these things. But at the end of the day, sisters, it's really about, having the tools and learning the things that are being weaponized, or things that are being used against us when it comes to manipulation, and how people tap into your mind. And, for a sister, she could be very innocent, but coming from a place where she's very sheltered away from all these things. And then you meet someone who presents to you in a way that, he seems very reasonable and very nice, and, all the other stuff that goes with it. And for you, you're thinking, oh, okay, like, he likes me, so inshallah, I want to get married. And you find some form of attraction in that relationship, or in the first, meeting, or in the first moments that you glimpse eyes with him, or you talk to him, or whatever it is. But it's being mindful that at the end of the day, for you to really be on guard and be vigilant, like, you have to stay vigilant, and you have to be on guard for how the conversations are playing out. And this is the beautiful thing, and I think the blessing of Islam, where we don't see people, inshallah, and we don't meet people without a mahram. And especially when it comes to, again, the conversations as well, I think it's really important for us to be able to guard and shield ourselves away from some of these fitnas that, because of a moment of weakness, we allow to unfold. And then the consequences of that is something that's very, subhanallah, like, you couldn't even imagine the impact, just that one time, that one mistake, the consequences, and the life, long consequences that could hold up for you. So I'm going to go back and inshallah play it.
Talking about sex to having sex, especially talking about sex, giving a certain look every now and again, misinterpreting, doing some of these other game tactics and game topics that we know. And once the girl starts explicitly talking about sex, as a guy, you're probably going to get a lot more confident, a lot more sure of yourself, be a lot more willing to take a lot of other risks, because you have permission as well, all right? So this idea of the question game is kind of a microcosm for what you want to be doing in an interaction in general, which is this. You want to be, as soon as there's enough comfort, and it's not a whole lot of comfort to start, you want to start introducing these sort of sexy topics. I don't want to say sexual topics, I call them sexy topics, because they're related to sex. And you want to be gradually and kind of inevitably escalating the conversation slowly towards sex, right? And that's going to do really wonders for everything. On top of that, I mentioned there are 3 other ways to escalate, right? Escalating the venue, escalating physically, and escalating the relationship. Once you start talking about more sexual venues, it makes sense to be in a more intimate venue. More sexual topics, it makes sense to be in a more intimate venue. Once you start talking about more sexual topics, it's just natural that you start talking about the relationship potentially between you and her, or kind of comparing, sex stories or sexual related stories. So the relationship stuff is naturally going to occur. It's also natural that when you start talking about sex, you might start touching, you might even start giving like visual or physical examples of something that happens, and that can lead to sex as well, okay? So all of these are really, really good ideas. One last thing that I'll throw in, it's kind of like a bonus topic, is the topic of other ways to bring up sexual topics that are even safer. If you're scared to even bring it up in general, a couple other things you can do. One is called quotes. Quotes is, instead of you saying something, you can mention somebody else said something. That way it's even more distant from you, but it's still in the conversation, right? There's this beautiful thing about human nature and human conversation. People can't imagine a negative. So if I say, like, don't think about a pink elephant, you just thought about a pink elephant, even though it's in the negative. You can't unthink it, okay? Same thing if I say don't think about sex, you just thought about sex, right? So if you bring it up as in so-and-so said yada, yada, yada about this sexual topic, it's even safer than you saying it yourself. It's a way to get into the conversation. And particularly if there's something that is a little risky or something that's a little on the edge or borderline, it may be a good way to introduce it without having culpability. The other great one is if you can do like a role play. If you and the girl are kind of playing different roles, or you're saying if this or a hypothetical, you can do a lot more in a hypothetical context. You can get away with a lot more hypothetically than you can if you're being explicit and direct about it. So that's one more way that you can introduce these topics without it being a problem. But in any case,
so I think we'll stop him there. Let me just stop the screen share. So I'm back. So firstly, I'll come back to your comments in a second, inshallah. So firstly, I think the whole premise of this video is exactly what he said just towards the end, which was permission. So I think for us as sisters, we have to be aware of nothing can escalate. Obviously, he said, it escalates to various different, ways or scenarios where he talks about the venue, he talks about I don't even remember now, but he talks about another two other things, and then obviously finally the physical. So I think it's not opening those doors. So inshallah, I hope that this brought a little bit more into our visual mind of how certain conversations can play out. And then when he said about, putting it in sort of a quote from someone else, I personally have heard of this where people will say to you, do you know what? This is what I've been told, oh, this is what I've heard. And again, like, we might think that's very naive and that's very innocent. But again, all these things are actually steps to seeing how comfortable you are with that initial, sort of start to the conversation, the testing of the waters. Are you comfortable with this? Are you? And then also he said about hypothetical. So it's like, oh, if, or I remember like there was once where I was talking to someone, and this is not now, this was ages ago, and they would refer to something, there was a sense of like enmeshment in the conversation of like, like as if they were trying to plant this idea in my head of me and them, in a way where like, oh, you know what, if we were married, this is what we would do. And again, that's just a very simple example, but I'm referring it to, you could use your own initiative, inshallah, and your own imagination. But, these conversations could also lead to other things where it could be very sexualized and also, kind of left you wondering. Like we know as sisters, if there is someone that you like and you've had a really nice conversation with a particular person, you can kind of ruminate and replay that conversation in your mind where you think about them and you kind of try to over analyze and look for little cues of like, what did he mean by this, and did he like me, and there's all these kind of like unclear sort of assumptions that get made in conversations. And I think that's a very key I mean, it's a very telltale sign of, the conversation wasn't very clear. It was kind of, there was something that was very suggestive about the conversation, and now you're kind of left to fill in the gaps, as they say. And the gaps could be with whatever. And again, if you're a very naive and very innocent young sister who hasn't really been exposed to the nature of men, unfortunately, not the inshallah practicing brothers, but I'm talking about people that maybe don't have faith, people that are very weak in their iman, then those things could leave you with feelings and evoking certain emotions within you, which then becomes the anchor of why you could be really invested emotionally into someone. And that's what it is. It's like, I said again earlier, it doesn't matter how much how much scripture that you have in your mind and how many hadiths you've got in your mind. Once you lose that sense of control or emotional stability within yourself and within your emotions, it's really easy for someone to tap into those feelings and to leave certain resonance with you of that conversation, which then leaves you to wanting more. And then like, the next day or the next week, then that conversation will be extended for another 10 minutes, another 20 minutes. By the time you know it, you're speaking to him privately without anyone else being present. And then, subhanAllah, you never know, the worst case scenario is that you end up getting a particular venue with him and doing the things that, may Allah protect us, that could leave you with serious harm, and also with the brother. May Allah protect us. I mean, so I'm just going to go into your comments, inshallah, and then we could resume after. That's how a lot of guys in the US think. That's why free mixing is a taboo. It is, subhanAllah. And thank you so much for saying that. And I think why a lot of us, I think, are very resistant when it comes to the free mixing situation, or not resistant, but I guess against, not having that segregation, especially not being left alone, and protecting yourself from certain areas. I think a lot of people could be resistant, and again, I'm just thinking out loud here, is because it stops them from having these feelings and these emotions. So when we think of a young girl who has, pretty much all her life really been taught about romance and about love in a way that is very skewed, and in a way that's very delusional, then you kind of feel like you're being oppressed. You're being denied something that could leave you feeling like, we know, okay, so think of like a movie, right? A rom-com or a very romantic movie that romantic films that any of us have watched. As like, for me, I know as a woman, like there's certain scenes in the movie where it triggers me. It makes me feel like, oh, okay, and it evokes, like, when the guy leaves the girl, or when calamity happens, as it always does, and then when they end up realizing that they love each other, and they can't live without each other, and they kind of come back together, and there is that sense of, like, happiness that you feel. So these are emotions that are being weaponized. So your own emotions are actually being used against you, because when people tap into that, they know that as human beings, we are heavily influenced by feelings. That's why you can know all the right things. Not to have that next piece of cake, right? Not to gravitate towards that addiction. But at the same time, there is a need, there is something that you're trying to suppress, deny, and distract yourself with, or whatever it is. So it's easier for you to overcome that reactionary feeling that you get in that present moment. And again, you could also say that human beings are very prone to happy feelings. We're told that we want Jannah on earth, right? So, when we don't want pain, we want pleasure. We know that, unfortunately, though, a lot of people actually get, a lot of people, kind of, I guess, wrong their ways, or correct themselves in the course of on their journey, through a way of them, having to deal with pain and certain experiences that will jilt them into the right discourse as they go along. So, subhanallah. So there's something like, for example, when we think of, the beauty of Islam, this is where I think, as a young woman, like, what we run away from and we deem as oppressive is actually the one thing that protects us and shelters us away from these mischiefs that happen and take place in the world. So the dignity of human beings and especially the dignity of a woman, is something that is utterly valued and, subhanallah, highly sanctified when it comes to Islam. Society obviously tells us differently. So, like, this is, I just wanted to share, like, how precious a woman is, and why there is this strict guidelines, or I guess these strict fences that get put around a woman in Islam. It's not in a way to oppress her, it's actually in a way where it's to protect her from the corruption of the world. Because a woman's womb, if we think about it in Arabic, the word of it is ar-raham, right? And ar-raham is extracted from the name of Allah Himself. Ar-Rahman, subhanallah, and that name means the most merciful. So this is a sign of elevation and closeness that a woman has to her creator, subhanallah, to her creator himself. And subhanallah, Allah is the king of the kings, the giver of life. Allah chose a woman to be the carrier of life into this existence, subhanallah, and in a lot of ways honored her position. So when we think of the honor that we have and the position, the lofty position as women that we carry, I feel like then is it to be justified how we could be lured away from our position with mere words and mere distraction and and things that are only really meant to rob us of our true essence and worth. So we know that in Islam, wherever a woman is, whether the woman is taken care of and protect, wherever we are, we're meant to be protected and also honored. So if we look at, for example, a young woman being in her father's house, he's raising her and he's spending on her. This is an act of worship for him. And this is the reward that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward him for. If we think of a husband, so when a woman moves out of her household and she moves into her husband's house, this is again where he spends on her and he treats her with, kindness and gentleness. Again, this is an act of his worship to Allah. And this is something that eventually, inshallah, he'll be rewarded for. So when we think of Islam, this is all really the most authentic narrations of our religion. When Islam came, if we even think back to how Islam sort of came in to being at the time of the Arabs, it came to a culture that that didn't treat women in a very favorable way. SubhanAllah, they used to do horrific acts when it comes to women. They used to bury young women alive. So when Islam came, it came to empower us as women. It came to give us rights and also dignity, subhanAllah. And this was something that was abused in that time, in that period, that frame of time. And also we might think, that this is just, a pre-Islamic period only. But unfortunately, this is the time that we live in today. This is also in our own time, in our own life, that we witness these things. And how we witness them is, one of them is the manifestations of, the idea of girlfriend and boyfriend and having premarital relationships. So something that is used to liberate a woman, and this is, that the pre the notion that it's or the way it's been packaged to us is that it's something that's liberating for a woman. And then when we look at Islam, they blame Muslims for being uptight, oppressive. But subhanallah, if we really think about it, right, honestly, and if we are subjective, which is more, I'm going to share two scenarios with us. Which of these scenarios would you say is more, more dignified? So one is that a woman gives her body, her emotions, time, and care freely to basically to someone who, and multiple people as well, not just to one person, who can enjoy all of that. And then at the same time, at the end of it, he leaves her whenever he wants without owing her anything, or also committing to her, and not giving her rights as a woman, as a human being. Or the second scenario is that a woman's body, feelings, needs are sanctified and guided by the Creator Himself. This is our Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if someone wishes to enjoy her in that way, then he has to testify before Allah and witnesses, subhanallah, and provide a contract. This is the thing, he actually has to provide a contract stating that he will be responsible to provide for her and for her financial needs, for her emotional needs, her physical needs, and also her legal rights. And if any harm or injustice that afflicted her, he would also be there, subhanallah. He would be there to protect her. So when we think of, how this person is held accountable, for him, he knows that he has a greater purpose. He's going to be held accountable for his actions on the day of judgment by the Creator himself. The Creator who created this woman, who gave him this gift or this blessing to be able to provide in all these different ways for her. So when we think about it, which scenario would you say dignifies and protects a woman out of the two? A woman who gives herself of everything so freely, without no rights, without no protection, without no care, without no commitment, or a woman who, a man has to testify in front of God and in front of witnesses that he's going to take this mighty, mighty commitment in a very serious way. Otherwise, if he doesn't, he has to be accountable for on the day of judgment. What a burden that is. But when someone doesn't have accountability, they could lure you with mere words. They could seduce you and entice you and manipulate you in a way that is more favorable for him, without even considering, anything else in that way. May Allah protect us. So when we think of the issues when it comes to having that open mind and open heart, we know that we'll realize that Allah doesn't want us to be abused. These are the fences, the barriers that Islam puts around a woman, is because Allah doesn't want us to be abused. He doesn't want us to be sexualized or made easily available, to become these objects that are very cheap and accessible to men, so they could use us for their own pleasure. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what he wants for us is to be, also for the brothers. I think if we think about it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is protecting the brothers as well, the men, because he doesn't want them to be a slave to their own desires and to commit injustice against themselves, or himself, and also about others. So when we think of, on accounts of his lustful and physical urges, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is protecting both of us. He's protecting the women and he's also protecting the man. And that's the wisdom about Islam and about having faith, is that we have parameters, we have standards, we have things that are put in place to make sure that the human being is held in a very dignified manner, and the human experience is very sanctified. It's a sacred experience that is, that firstly belongs to Allah, and also that belongs to each other when we think of in I guess a relationship dynamic. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself says, and I quote, "And we have certainly honored the children of Adam and carried them on the land and the sea, and provided for them of the good things, and preferred them over much of what we have created with definite preference." End of quote. And this is referenced in the Quran, verse 17, Surah 17, verse 17. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically honored us above other creation. But the first scenario, if we think about it, as I shared earlier, is that, for many people seems easier. That's where we think, okay, fulfilling physical needs is easy. But if we think about it, any creature can do that. Even those who are below us in ranks and are not gifted with intelligence or ability to purify and discipline their being and their desires. So when we think about it, we're actually not much different to, our, people that are, or not people, but our other animal, sort of mammals, when we think of in that context. So the first, when we think about it again, it's like saying that it's easier to submit to the physical needs. But what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Islam is calling us to is to be elevated above the physical and to explore meanings that are much more deeper, richer, and more everlasting than that. So marriage in Islam is more of is more than just fulfilling the physical urges. Yes, that's there, but it's more than that. That's not the premises for a marriage in Islam. It's about peace. It's about mercy, tranquility to the heart, or bringing tranquility to the heart and the mind and the soul. It's meant to be a journey of intelligent, sort of intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and physical growth and evolution, and also to be elevated, subhanallah. It is considered an act of worship, subhanallah. You know, if we follow that path, the path that our creator Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed to us through the messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his teachings, when it comes to how to have a, you know, a human experience, the humanity, the experiences that we have in this world. And may Allah make it easy for us, inshallah. So faith in marriage is a language and a deeper bond between the couples. Those who are connected through their love for their creator, which should be the focus of our this experience, this journey that we have. And you know, there is a sense of gratitude towards him for this. You know, our desires for closeness and you know, our pursuit for knowledge, all of these are all of these are really a major common ground that gets brought into the relationship between the partners. It's like, if you say, for example, it's like bringing the eternal bond that connects us to the internal creator, eternal creator. And what I mean by this is that, you know, we hope and we pray to remain connected to Allah for eternity, and also in this journey and in the hereafter. And in us to do that, like the relationships we have with one another should be a representation of that, rather than just of our own selfish needs and wants. And you know, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again protect us, because we know that the bond between the spouses is beautifully described in the Quran by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who says, and I quote, "They are your garments and you are their garments. They are clothing for you and you are clothing for them." End of quote. Quran verse Surah 2, verse 187. And this is meaning that, you know, that like they're so close to you, like your partner, and they cover you, they fulfill your every need, and they fulfill, and you also fulfill that for them. And I also just want to mention another reference from the Quran, which even more, you know, actually describes the beauty of marriage as a sign of the Creator. And this is a quote from the Quran, and I quote again. It says, "And of His signs is that He created for you from yourselves mates, that you may find tranquility in them. And He placed between you affection and mercy. Indeed, in that are signs for people who give thought." End of quote. And that's again Surah 30, verse 21. So when we think of a sign, so like a sign is something that leads us to a destination, right? There's a sign because you're going somewhere and there is a destination that you're heading towards. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that, you know, this relationship is one of his signs for us. And this is because when we're experiencing mercy, we get reminded that Allah's, you know, Allah's name, subhanAllah, Allah's attributes, that he's the most merciful, the source of mercy. And you know, any mercy that we experience in a fraction of, you know, of his infinite mercy, this helps us to long for him. Subhanallah, like how beautiful is that? And when we experience deep affection, you know, when we remember that his name, Al-Wadud, you know, the most loving, we remember that he's the source of ultimate pure affection. When we love our partner, we also fall deeply in love, and we have gratitude to the one, subhanallah, who created them in the first place for us. A husband and a wife smiling at each other is an act of worship. We're told that, right? And we actually get rewarded for it. There are so many experiences that we go through, and they are all reflections of Allah's presence, His names and His gifts that He's given us and that we have. But when we deviate, and devoid man and woman from the relationships of those everlasting meaning, and, subhanAllah, lower it to just the fulfilling of temporary physical needs, and that are resulted of infatuation and lust only, then they are really doing themselves injustice. And again, that video that I just spoke about, that is a form of injustice. It's injustice because you're just thinking about yourself. You're coming from a very selfish place. You're using manipulative ways and tricks and all these things to be able to captivate a person in a way that is un-Islamic. That's not halal. And may Allah protect us from it. So we know that there is the notion among some people that premarital relationships are necessary so that the couples can get to know one another, right? So we call it, the testing. But this is really a delusion. It really, really is, subhanallah. And it's degrading and dehumiliating to every to the man and to the woman, to both participants. There is, like, when we think about it, there is no way that one will be able to know what will happen in the future. No matter how long you test drive, the partner or whatever it is, like you're never gonna know. Like that could ultimately result in still like it not working out, right? And we know that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows of the future, and in the unseen, what's to unfold for us. So if couples are united in, for Allah's sake and through the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we know, inshallah, that, that would have, descendants, there would be some form of peace that descends upon us, mercy, love, and tranquility. And this would all come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most knowing, and who's the source of peace, love, and mercy. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us, because sometimes I really do wonder about, how these relationships, how they unfold and how they come into manifestation, and then also, that where is the accountability, where is the responsibility? Because on both of those two young people, they both have accountability for the roles that they've been given, and they both have responsibility, but they also both have accountability for those roles. Like when we talk about power, and having free will is having the choice and the opportunity to be able to make a choice that you want to make, right? Because you have the choice. That's where your power lies. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most powerful. But when we talk about the freedom that we've been given in this realm, is that we have free choice. But when we don't know the consequences of the choices that we make, and when we don't have a clue as to why we make them in the first place, then we're just left in the dark. It's like we're just roaming in the dark, unfortunately. May Allah protect us from that. I really do pray that Allah protect us from it. And when we think of the idea of like, I'm gonna try him or her, like I'm sure we've heard, sort of in the West, like, oh, well, you know what, I don't want to get something and and I'm not pleased with it, so I want to kind of like try him and her, and like have that, feel for the situation. But subhanallah, what we're forgetting is that, he or her is not going to be perfect, whether you try it or not. You human beings, we have these traits, we have qualities that in relationships they're gonna come out, they're gonna be played out in, and that when we talk about perfection, you know, no one's ever going to be perfect enough for you, right? Like, you know, when we talk about, yeah, you know what, I want to continue this relationship, and then, you know, if it doesn't work out, then I'll just ditch him or her. And then we have this mindset where we can just, you know, pick people up as these objects, and then we can just get rid of them when, you know, we're done with them, or when, you know, they don't, you know, they don't entertain us the way we wanted them to entertain us, or they don't fulfill those needs that we have, you know, and we don't worry about it. You know, we call it no strings attached, right? Like now we have all these different new words for it. You know, we have the side chick, we have, you know, the friend zone, we have friends with benefit. Like there's all these new terminologies that are being used for what really is just to degrade the human experience, and, you know, for both parties to cause a lot of injustice for themselves. And then, you know, at the end of the day, they are going to be responsible for that. So what we're teaching young people is that it's okay to be selfish, and it's okay to lack responsibility. And what we're not going to, what we need to know is that, you know, we're not going to be perfect. We're not going to be perfect partners in this world. You know, yes, we can choose people based on values and, you know, and true faith and righteousness, responsibility, and good, you know, reputation, and the initial, you know, first attraction that we have. And subhanallah, we can commit and ask the creator to bless and ease that situation for us, and to aid us for, you know, both parties in that, in the path, inshallah, to be able to please him. um but then at the same time, you know, that is far more greater than if you just went ahead and just, you know, tried people here and there, you know, got married, got divorced, went here, went there. Like there's no sense of like that structure. There's no sense of like holding people to account, you know, to be accountable, and to be able to overcome a lot of these, you know, messed up things that we're teaching our children in society. May Allah protect us. I mean, Assalamu alaikum. Sorry, I hope I'm gonna come back. Sorry, I was just in my thought. Wa alaikum. So let me read the comments now. Thank you so much all for joining. Subhanallah. May Allah protect us. Ameen. Firstly, may Allah reward you. Salam and big up. Oh, Nour, I've never seen you before. Jazakallah khairan for tuning in. Oh, Jazakallah khairan. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brother. Rahman is the womb of the mother. Rahman comes from the root word, like a mother loves her unborn child, despite all the pain, without even knowing how he or she might turn out to be. Allahu Akbar. That's so beautiful. Subhanallah. Thank you for sharing that. I think I missed the video. Oh, you missed the video, Riva, sister? Inshallah, you'll be able to tune in afterwards, inshallah. Wa alaikum assalam to you, sis. Subhanallah. Unfortunately, you did, sister. Yeah. Inshallah, you'll be able to tune in after. So yeah, subhanallah. Just to recap about the video then, it really was. So there's this guy, he's a pickup artist. I think he's from America. He had an American accent. It's about 9 minutes long. And the video was just talking about how to lead conversations, how to get a conversation to lead to, you know, the topic of sex. And the reason why I shared that video was because I know a lot of, you know, our young sisters might have this cognitive dissonance within them, where, you know, we could look at Islam as, you know, oppressive, there's no fun, you know, you're not being liberated. But then you have the, you know, analogy, well, I guess the perspective from a Western perspective, where you're liberated and you can do whatever you want, and there's no accountability or consequences to any of that. And also, I think what the video for me, what it highlighted was how unconsciously, sometimes as a young woman who's very naive, you could be manipulated with words, and the tactics and tricks that some people might use to be able to get what they want from you as a sister. And I think it was really important for me to share this, because when we only have one narrative out there in the world, and we don't, you're young, you're naive, you can be gullible, and subhanallah, it's your time to explore, right? Explore the world, explore who you are. You could be enticed and drawn in by a lot of these banners that go around, around us, whether it's social media, whether it's conversations that we have with our friends, whether it's dating apps, marital apps, sorry, not dating apps. You might as well call them dating apps, some of them. But yeah, like those marriage apps that we find online, and how all of these things could open the doors to a very impressionable young girl and also an impressionable young boy, to the fitna that goes out in the world. And sometimes it might seem like I'm, always more so towards the sister side, and it's not necessarily true. And the reason for that is because I feel like as a young sister, especially a lot of the homes that I've witnessed a young women coming from, or they've come from, is that they're very sheltered. Where with boys, unfortunately, there is that freedom that, a young boy might have in a Muslim home, where he can go out and, have different experiences, where he can mix with friends, or, he'll have his friends tell him stories or whatever it is. But with a young girl, I feel like sometimes, those opportunities are not really widely or as easily accessible for her, because maybe she just has Muslim friends, and it's not easy for her to mix. Maybe she just wears the hijab, and in school people have always just stayed away from her or looked at her as someone that is no fun. Maybe she's boring, or she's whatever that they seem to label people as. And then she might meet a brother online, in a very naive way, and she might get besotted with him, and he might throw a few lines, and then she'd be like, wow, like, I'm not used to this attention, I'm not used to having these feelings, and all the whole while what he was doing was he was planting things, and things that were very suggestive, um, in her brain. And then she became very reactive to that, and then that could be what, because of one mistake, is something that would stick with her for the rest of her life, and she would have to carry that pain, whatever that is, for her whole life, and her whole life could be ruined just because of that one naive, innocent experience. So I think for me, this is why I want to put a lot of different things on, because I think it's easy to teach someone about Islam. And I think, yes, we should learn, but you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you're like, it's like a house, right? Okay, you have the door shut, you've got the door, all the bolts, everything's on the chain, whatever, right? But then you have the windows open. And the windows, for me, it's like, okay, so you close the door to shaitan, but then you have a window open where, a social media clip could come through, or a picture, or, one of those halal Muslim apps where a brother could easily portray himself to be quite relaxing, quite practicing. But then at the same time, he could have a weak iman as well. Like he wants to get married, the sister wants to get married, but because of instead of not rushing things and taking their time, getting to know one another and being able to, create things that are very Islamic, and sticking to the fences and the guidelines and things that are designed for us as women, that protects us, the boy could easily get infatuated with the girl, vice versa. And then there you go, you know. So yes, it's, the Quran says, "Do not come close to zina." Um, when people hear that, they could think, "Well, I'm not actually committing the act. It's not like I'm meeting the brother. He's somewhere here, and he's not somewhere that I could go and see him. So it's okay for me to speak to him." And then those conversations, that's what leads to the topic of sex, which touches up on, in terms of your biology, like your desire. Like when people are young, there's hormones that they have, subhanallah. There's a biological thing that goes on with the human body, and then at the same time there is this sense of emotions, unmet needs or desires or expectations as a child. And because there were certain things that were deficient or lacking, now you play out those things within, as an adult, but in a more intimate relationship with someone of the opposite gender. And then when that person pulls on your heartstrings and they make you feel seen, and they give you attention, and they make you feel free, where some of your dark deepest thoughts, like you've never told anyone, as a Muslim you're told you should just be an angel, um because sometimes that's how we present the deen when it comes to our young children. It's like, well, you're going to go hell, or you're going to have to be a saint, and then children have these thoughts. They, human beings have thoughts. Sometimes we have thoughts that come out of nowhere. Sometimes we have thoughts because we've watched something, or we've heard something, or we've had a conversation with someone. And all of these things, it's recorded. It's like, it's like a drive. We have a drive that's recorded. So when someone now comes into our experience, and they can tap onto those emotions, and the one thing that generally, because we need to procreate, right? So we have these desires that are very much present, and it can't unfortunately be ignored, because we have free will. We could choose it to use it in a way that's very un-Islamic, where it could lead to fitna and various ill consequences, and then eventually hellfire. May Allah protect us from it. And that's why we're told don't even come close to zina. But then we have another side where we could cultivate that experience in a way where it's nurturing and beneficial to both the young boy and young girl, and to be able to do it in a way that's very Islamic, very halal, and so they could have the best start to go upon their journey. But I think it all, when we think of, again, zina, we think of, touching, we think of the actual act, we think of kissing, we think of various different things that, again, these are just the manifestations of what's in our heart, right? So in order for our heart and our mind to, inshallah, not be clouded, we have to first understand why we feel what we feel. Why do I feel this? Why do I, if someone gets enticed by words, and unfortunately as women, sometimes we fall in love with people's potential rather their accomplishment. We make people, we put men on a pedestal because of, for whatever reason or another. We tend to idolize, relationships and romantic, and we romanticize, the relationships that play out between men and women. So, there's so much, subhanallah, that could go into it. And I think we need to have a really, we need to go through things, and we need to, pick out the underlying issues, and rather than just looking at the symptom, we need to actually go to the root, like what is causing this. And I feel like a lot of the time it's lack of education. I'm a great believer in, we're told even in the Quran, like, education for a man, woman, and child is very important, because when you have knowledge, especially knowledge with action, it creates a sense of safety. It protects you. It's easier for you to, figure out the truth from the falsehood. But if you don't really know, and you're just being very reactionary, and you're going off emotions and feelings, and then, logically you're desensitized because you think it's okay, or, society tells you it's normal, then there's going to be loads and loads of challenges. And you know, it's just going to be this one uphill battle that you're just going to keep going and coming back down. So, you know, prevention is better than cure. And that's what Islam teaches us. Islam doesn't teach us to, you know, just be problem orientated or solution orientated, but it's definitely to be more of a solution orientated, because prevention is better than the cure. It's very common to use Islam as a weapon against kids. That punishes them away from Islam. That pushes them away from Islam. I totally agree. Subhanallah, may Allah protect us. So yeah, so on that note, may Allah reward you all for tuning in. Inshallah, I hope it's of benefit. And I would definitely say please watch the video earlier on that it was a reaction video, and I just further elaborated on a few other things on there as well. But yeah, subhanallah, knowledge is power. And I think, you know, we have to help our children and our young men and women, and we also have to help ourselves to understand some of the ways that, you know, we're allowing ourselves to be manipulated, and also some of the ways that people are manipulating us and taking advantage of us. And may Allah protect us, because hey, there's accountability and responsibility, and with free will we have power, so let's not give that away, inshallah. May Allah keep us firm upon the truth. Allahumma ameen. And on that note, may Allah reward you all for tuning in. And inshallah, I will catch you guys soon. Assalamu alaikum.